Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It is Zakhele Mthembu here, and welcome back to the channel. We are continuing our series of videos about papers that were launched under the Liberty First project, and today we are talking about Dr. Morné Malan's paper about cutting the size of the state. The title of the paper is Lean but Efficient: The Fiscal and Moral Imperative of Cutting South Africa's Cabinet. And I think really to frame it, I think we have spoken about this at the Free Market Foundation, of how big the South African state is. Right, the South African state currently costs us 32.6% of our gross domestic product as a country, and that is well above what the international recommendations for developing nations like South Africa is, right, which is really 20 to 30% of GDP. And the consequences of that is that it discourages investment and it takes away, resources from actual vital services. And as we know, the most vital services the state can administer really concern the protection of life, liberty, and property. And given the problems that we have on those three areas in South Africa, really, I find that the size of the state being this large is unjustifiable because, well, where are the results, right? But that is the problem. Our cabinet is big, right? We currently have, I think, 32 ministries with 37 deputy ministers. That is a whole lot. Right, that is a large state because every ministry represents a regulatory area, a particular statute they are enforcing. And as such, this creates a whole lot of costs on our economy alone. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm still, framing the conversation here, the problem rather, right? And since we spend 32.6% of our GDP on the state itself, it means that, public debt will be something that we struggle with, right? Public debt is currently projected to reach 81.7% of GDP by 2026. Next year. So, that is problematic. And why is public debt a problem when you have a large state? Is because taxes can only go so far, right? You can only raise taxes so much on your populace to fund this overgrown state before the populace either, revolts or they leave. Those who are able, the tax base will just shrink, the productivity will fall because it will not be worthwhile for businesses to continue being productive. And what ultimately happens is, in an attempt to raise more revenue, by increasing taxes, what states usually do, and why it is discouraged by most economists really who are sound and would be truthful to tell politicians the truth about economic realities, they would discourage the continuous raising of taxes, something that we are still dealing with in South Africa, in that, you can only raise taxes so far before the revenue collection starts going down too, because, the factors that come with raising taxes beyond a particular threshold means that those who are affected by them will either stop being productive, revolt against you, or just leave. And that is the problem that South Africa is facing, and that is a problem associated with a large state. How do we solve this? Reduce the size of the state. You have to cut it down. We have to make some sacrifices, not even counting the actual, effects, the ethics of saddling future South Africans with so much debt for services that they have not even enjoyed as of yet. Now, of course, as I said, the solution to all of this is just cutting the entire size of the state, cutting the size of the cabinet, and that will save us money. And as I've mentioned that, the range of the recommended, really the percentage of GDP that developing nations should spend on their state is 20 to 30%, right? South Africa spending above the growth maximizing range is of course hurting us, as I have said. And this is, contrasted with countries with leaner, administrations, countries like Singapore, countries like New Zealand, countries like Germany. Countries that tend to be more prosperous, and this fact is actually borne true even in Economic Freedom of the World Index released by the Fraser Institute and in partnership with the Free Market Foundation, at least for the South African version, is that we see a particular trend. The smaller the size of the government and the state is in a particular jurisdiction, the more likely that jurisdiction is to be prosperous. Because if you see the index, right, states that sit at top of the index in terms of prosperity are states that usually have much more leaner and efficient states or cabinets in this instance. And as such, it means that, there is a correlatory effect, at the least, between the size of the government and the prosperity of the citizens within that jurisdiction that the government runs. Now, as I've mentioned, South Africa, we have 32 ministries, we have 37 deputy ministries. And, as a comparison, right, to other countries, Germany has 17 ministries. Germany is a much more richer, jurisdiction than South Africa. Japan has 20 ministries, Singapore has 15. Contrast that with 32 ministries. We have 32. And, irrespective of what you may think ideologically about this, I think we can all agree that there is room for cuts to be made, right? There is room for cost saving to be made, which was why it was so disheartening earlier on in the year when the VAT issue was being discussed, that cutting government services or cutting really the size of the cabinet itself was not something that the GNU was prepared to even entertain, right? And that is pretty unfortunate because, as I mentioned, you can only raise taxes so much before it starts impacting the revenue you collect as a state, right? Now, as we all know, a large cabinet will cost us a whole lot of money. Cutting it will save us that money. And, you can go look at the figures at the Liberty First site where the paper is published itself for much more in-depth, going into the actual numbers of it and how much we'll be saving. But really, the most important thing is that we have a solution, right? If we say there's too many ministries, what is the solution to it? Well, our solution is really just cutting down the entire cabinet to 10 ministries. And this would be the ministry in the presidency, finance, cooperative governance, justice, international relations, defense, home affairs, infrastructure, natural resources, trade and industry, as well as social development. Now, in large part, these are ministries that are constitutionally mandated, right? Meaning that really for us to be able to get rid of any one of these, we would have to, in some respects, amend the constitution. And that is quite, a laborious task, as anyone from whatever ideological aisle can attest to. So really, rather than that, let us just reduce them to only what the constitution mandates should exist and reduce them to 10, really. According to Dr. Malan, reduce them to these 10. And I agree with him. I think these are 10 core principles, right? This will reduce duplication in most cases that not, would go from 32 ministries to 10. I think the cost saving is just really apparent from there, right? From like a prima facie level, you will see that there are some costs to be saved because, well, we'll be paying less ministries and the associated administration of those ministries, and really go towards a long way in freeing up the money to reduce our debt burden so that we aren't sending future South Africans, some of whom aren't even born yet, with the debt for things that they aren't enjoying. Right, and there are particular mergers between, ministries that are recommended in the paper and everything. And you can go look at more detail in that. I just wanted to communicate the core, really, of the 10 ministries that I just mentioned. And Dr. Malan even has a roadmap, which I found to be pretty intriguing, right? A roadmap on how we can go about achieving all of these goals that we believe in or that are presented in the paper. And here one is an auditing of all ministries and the freezing of new regulations, right? This is going towards the step of reducing the size of the cabinet from 32 to 10. And, in year 2, you merge or dissolve redundant departments, which will redirect savings. And in year 3, you privatize SOEs and embed regulatory impact checks. And I find the, year 3 part of the roadmap to be pretty important, right? Embedding particularly regulatory impact checks is something that I find to be pretty instrumental to governance, right? If you're going to say that a particular law or a particular regulation has a certain end in mind, I think it should only be natural that you want to check whether that end is actually being reproduced by the means that you have employed in the form of regulation. So I think that is a pretty cool thing to have. And as such, really, that is the core of the arguments that Dr. Malan is making in his paper. Reduce the size of the state, it will save us money. The current size of the state, it is not recommended really for a country of South Africa's size. If we do reduce the size of the state, we will most likely be more prosperous like other countries who have smaller governments are. And most importantly, you reduce the ministries, the cabinets, from 32 to 10, the 10 that I just mentioned, that we can just go over one more last time, right? To the ministry and the presidency, finance, cooperative governance, justice, international relations, defense, home affairs, infrastructure, natural resources, trade and industry, as well as social development. I think that's, this 10 covers a variety, if not all really, of the current competencies of the South African state without the regulatory duplication and the spending of what goes into the billions in terms of administrative staff, officers, property, and like all of these things for these, ministers and their deputy ministers, and, all of the associated infrastructure that comes with having a ministry. So really, those who were the thoughts of Dr. Malan, ones that I do agree with, if I might add. I think South Africa definitely does need a smaller state for all of the reasons stated. But for me, really, it is the public debt issue, right? Like, I find it to be pretty disheartening that, as current South Africans, we're willing to take out debts that we know we will not be paying back to get things in the modern day, that I guess those who will be paying off the debts in the future will have to take out more debt to pay for the things that they will need then. And I find that to be a pretty disheartening cycle if you actually look at it from a much more bigger perspective. But those are the thoughts. Please do tell me yours, right? As I've laid out my own, I am firmly on the side of reducing the size of the cabinets. I find 10 to still even be a high number, but I think that it's a very good number for the implementation, right? To make everyone happy. But yeah, I'm firmly on the side of reducing the size of the cabinet because really it is the right thing to do. But maybe you oppose it. Maybe you want a big state. Maybe you are a fan of the developmental state, as international institutions would like to call it. And maybe you're like, no, the South African state is too small. It needs to grow even larger. Please do tell me your thoughts down below. Give this video a like. If you haven't as of yet, subscribe to. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, share it. It really does help a lot. And as always, remember, stay free.